Okay, well, let's get started for the last one of the Artist Alley 101 series. I can't believe it took me 4 parts to cover everything I wanted to. And even then, I'm kind of scratching at the surface of Artist Alley, so I recommend, like, again, everybody doing their own research and stuff. So, okay, so first of all, a disclaimer as always. So everything that I have put together and kind of stuff that I'm talking about is based on my own experience and doing very specifically anime conventions in the United States. So some stuff might apply to you, some stuff might not. So again, I recommend everybody to do their own research. Everybody's really different, and everybody has different experiences in Artist Alley, and that's okay. Everybody just needs to find whatever works for them. I'm just gonna grab my water. Okay. Let's see. Okay, I think that's it for disclaimers. I'm just gonna get started. So this is part 4, like I said, and this time we'll be covering stuff to do at the actual convention, some things um, to kind of expect, because you know it might be really scary kind of going into something, a big event like this, without really knowing what to expect. So if you have any questions, always, like always, just type it in and I'll kind of get to them as I go. Thank you to the person who pressed hearts. I see hearts floating on my Twitch. um, and yeah, again, don't hesitate to ask me questions. If you missed out on parts 1, 2, and 3, um, they are all on YouTube now, and so you can. I think maybe I don't have a link. I should update my information down below so that it will add the YouTube so you guys can go watch it. Part 2 and part 3 are in the Twitch like video section. It's like recorded, but part 1 was not. So I'll update that later. Okay, so let's get started. Let me find my PowerPoint. Okay, so selling at the convention. Okay, so the first thing I wanted to cover is a general convention schedule. Again, every convention is really, really different, and so this schedule is like a really general, really broad kind of what probably will happen, but like the exact hours and like how long things happen and stuff are very different for every con. So make sure you read up on that. On the convention's website, or usually they will email all of this information to you, maybe like a week, maybe 2 weeks before everything happens. So this information should be readily available to you guys. So just quick, day 0 refers to the day before the convention is open to the general public. So conventions usually start on Fridays and end on Sundays. There are a couple instances where maybe Monday is a holiday, and so it'll actually go from like Friday to Monday, or sometimes it'll actually start on Thursday instead. But usually day 0 refers to the day before the convention is open, and during that time, artists are free to come and pick up their badges. And once they've picked up your badge, you can get set up in the Artist Alley beforehand, so you don't have to do it all the day of. That being said, you can set up on day 1 in the morning. Let me just turn on my laser pointer real quick so I can point with it. Okay, yeah, so most cons allow you to set up in the morning. Depending on the convention, the hours at which you are open, like you are welcome into the Artist Alley Hall, is a little bit different. Usually it's like 8 o'clock on the first day, and once you get in, you can set up and stuff. On day 1, the Artist Alley hour that is open to the public is generally a little bit later. I've seen it range anywhere from like 10 a.m. on the early end to like 2 p.m. on the late end. So it's a little bit later than the days afterwards, which I'll talk about a little bit, but usually ends at the same time. I've seen conventions end anywhere between like 7 p.m. to like 10 p.m. Again, it'll depend on the convention, but that's kind of the times that you should expect. Day 2 or day 3, if there is one, is regular artist alley open hours. Usually the convention will start somewhere around like 10 a.m., maybe 9 a.m. if it's like really early, but I've never seen it open before like 9 a.m. Usually the alley is open for artists to come in like an hour beforehand, so you can kind of go in, get set up, maybe talk to other artists and stuff like that. Again, it ends later that night, and on the last day, it will end sometime usually in the afternoon or early evening. And after that, the entire convention starts tearing down, so that includes the artist alley. You basically take all of your setup and you take it back down. Usually, the artist alley closes between like 2 p.m. to 5 p.m. on the last day, and then you're usually given about 2 to 3 hours to tear down afterwards. But I will mention that again later. So this is kind of the general overview of the schedules that you should expect to see at the convention. Most conventions, I will point out, don't have breaks in the middle. I think Colossal Con is the only convention I'm aware of that has lunch break for artists where the entire artist alley shuts down for like an hour. But otherwise, there usually are no like official breaks. You just kind of need to go whenever you need to go, maybe get some helpers and stuff like that. And the one other thing I will mention is that there are 24-hour artist alleys. So conventions like MagFest has 24-hour long artist alleys. And at that point, you kind of set up your own schedule. If you want to stay there 24 hours and maybe, you and a friend will like take turns being at the table or something, or if you just want to shut down at the end of the day, that's okay. You just kind of set your own rules, but just be aware that those artist alleys do exist as well. Okay, so moving on. Setup tips. So you usually get your badge either on day 0 or really early in the morning on day 1. And once you get your badge, you can get straight to setup. Honestly, setup is really open for everybody. People can do really whatever they want. But I just thought I would kind of put together what I usually do and what I have personally found helpful when setting up. So usually the first thing I'll put down is the tablecloth because it's kind of like the base, the background of your entire setup. And if you're going to put stuff on top of it, it's really annoying to have to put a tablecloth after when there's stuff on it, because then you have to clear everything off and then put the tablecloth back on. So tablecloth goes first. I personally put up prints right after. And then I will start putting up the merchandise on the table, things like grid cubes or little risers and stuff like that. And then at the very, very end, I'll start putting up like pricing signs and things like that. So a couple of notes about prints and about setting up your table that actually might have been better if it was in part 3 instead of part 4, but it's here now. So for prints, it is generally a good idea if you are raising them like a wall to have bigger prints up atop. And that's just because if you are standing in front of a table, you have to like look up to the prints, and it's kind of far away. And so if you have bigger prints on top, it just makes it easier to see for the customers. And also, I personally separate my prints based on fandom. So I'd put like all the Final Fantasies together or like all the Kingdom Hearts together. And personally, I think that makes it easier for the customers to kind of find the things they are interested in. So if, for example, a Final Fantasy 12 picture catches their eye and I have like Final Fantasy 15 right next to it, usually Final Fantasy fans probably know all the other Final Fantasies also. And so it's like, oh, I like that Final Fantasy 12 picture. Oh, but suddenly I see this Final Fantasy 15 picture or something like that. It just makes it really easy for the customers to kind of glance around and see what they're interested in. For tables, A couple things about that is that if you have like items like charms or notebooks or stuff like that, usually you either put a couple of items up front, maybe like 2 or 3 notebooks or something like that, or you can just put up one display. So I do a little bit of both. So all of my charms, I only have one up for display, and that just makes it so that one single display is the only one that's getting kind of roughened up over the course of many conventions, and I don't really have to worry about the other charms in my inventory behind the table get like manhandled or anything like that. But then if I have like little pouches, I might want to put like a couple and make it look like a little shop. So it's really up to you. It depends on the type of item you're selling, how much table space you have, and things like that. So just do whatever fits your table. And the other thing I wanted to note about table items is that unlike the prints, it's a little bit more common for for things on the table, merchandise, to be separated by either the price or the deals that they belong to. So it's generally just easier for customers to understand how you're selling things for however much if you put common types of items together. So all the charms might be together, and there might be like a 2 for 15 deal, or all of the notebooks might be together, and maybe there's like a 2 for 40 deal or something like that. If you could separate it by fandom, but unfortunately it's a little bit harder to work with the deals that way. So most of the time I've seen people separate items by pricing or deals. But like I said, as long as you finish setup before the artist alley hour opens, generally anything goes. Just set up your table however you want, in whatever way you think is best for your artwork. Okay, so I just wanted to talk a little bit about space etiquette as well. When you are setting up, generally that means there's no like attendees around. It's just you, the other artists, and maybe a couple staff. And so you're free to use quite a bit of space. Just make sure that people can still walk pretty easily around all your stuff. You don't want to like spread all of your display items and just take up the entire hallway so that nobody can pass through. That's a little bit rude, and you just have to make sure that your stuff is kind of compact as like realistically possible. During actual convention hours, usually everything that you have goes underneath the table or behind your table. So for me, I usually come with 1 or 2 suitcases, and both of those suitcases I would shove kind of underneath my table. And my tablecloth covers it up in the front so you can't really see it. But I also don't like putting it kind of in the back just because I think it gets in the way of other people's stuff. And that's something that you will have to keep in mind, because if your table is facing front, behind you there's probably another table that has their back to you. And so whatever table you have behind the table is also shared common space with whoever is behind you. And so just be aware of that, and don't just like have everything out everywhere. And that's also something to keep in mind when you're thinking about setup, to make sure that you have items that don't take up too much space so that you're not just hogging everybody's kind of communal space. Depending on the convention, the amount of space you'll have behind the tables could really differ. Some conventions will have it kind of tight. Some conventions will actually have these like really big loops of artists so that there's a giant space in the middle, and there's plenty of space. So it really depends. Usually, if you look at the convention map, you would be able to tell. But if it hasn't been released yet, maybe you can ask other artists who have been to that convention, and see what their experience was like. So again, to summarize, just everybody has a lot of stuff, so it's a good idea just to be respectful. Okay, so now I want to talk about actually talking to your customers and the other attendees. Generally, the people who are going to conventions are there to really share their passion. It's unfortunate, but generally, anime and video games and things like that aren't something that you can just have a conversation with with some like stranger at a bus stop. Like you can't just like go to your bus stop and be like, hey, Naruto, you can't really do that. And so a lot of times a convention goers are really excited about the convention. They're really excited to talk to a lot of people about the things that they're passionate about. And so it's a lot of fun talking to customers. And it's always really fun to bond to people who are like, oh, I really like this charm. Like I wanted to ask your opinion on what you thought about the latest episode or something like that. And so there are a lot of people that really love to talk, and it's really like a rewarding experience talking to all of them. That being said, there are also a lot of customers that if they are just kind of browsing, they don't really like to be badgered. So if you think like if you're going to a clothing store clothing store, oh gosh, a clothing store, and you're kind of just browsing on your own, and usually for me personally, and I think a lot of other people, they don't really like it when people are kind of like, oh, check out this new item, oh, check out this new item, and whatever. And so just make sure you give the customers some space. A really good way to kind of gauge the amount of space is just to say hello when they first drop by your table, ask how they're doing, maybe, say, oh, I love your cosplay, or like, oh, I love, this character on your eat a bag or something like that, and see if the conversation goes from there. And if it doesn't, then maybe it's someone who just kind of likes to browse on their own. And if they do like to keep talking about it, it's just a lot of fun for both you and the attendee. So Takoyaki says, hey, do Naruto. Yeah, if only that was acceptable, but unfortunately it's not. So, well, in most places anyway. Um, yeah, so like I was saying, it's really important to kind of gauge people's level of comfort when interacting with them. And it's also just really important to interact with people in general. And so if you are at your table and let's say you took commissions, you're making charms or something like that, if you're just sitting there and kind of like downturned and always just doing your own thing and you don't really acknowledge the people who drop by, it makes it a little bit more difficult for the customers to approach you, even if they kind of wanted to. And in my experience, if it's harder for a customer to approach you, it's harder for them to buy your stuff. And so just make sure that even if it is a customer who looks like they are maybe a little bit shy and don't really want to talk or anything, just make sure that you acknowledge them, maybe look at them, smile, say, let me know if you have any questions or something like that. So yeah, even if you're working, remember to look up every now and then and acknowledge your customers. So really, in conclusion, it's a lot of fun. Just be at the convention, just kind of talk to everybody like, you would just talk to just strangers that have the same like passions as you do, which is really essentially what it is. So just be respectful, and just kind of let them know that if they do have questions, that they are definitely okay to ask you for stuff. Just be respectful, the golden rule. Okay, so most attendees are really nice. They're just, excitable, happy, like anime and gaming fans, or maybe fans of your artwork and things like that. I will say there are difficult attendees every now and then. Just like anywhere, there's just sometimes people are too excited, or sometimes people aren't really like thinking about what they're doing and they might come off as rude. So I have three categories of people I personally consider are a little bit difficult, at least for me to kind of deal with. So that they are rude attendees, unwanted barnacles, and hagglers, specifically really aggressive hagglers. So first of all, for rude attendees, the thing to remember for them is that when someone is walking by and maybe they say something like, oh, I don't really like that pose, or like, oh, I don't really like the colors, or something like that about your artwork, like 90% of the time, they aren't really doing it with ill intent. A lot of times they just kind of forget that you are an actual person sitting there and this is all of your stuff. Sometimes people just kind of forget that. And so if they do say that, I personally just kind of ignore it. But if it's something that really kind of bothers you, just be kind of polite and make a comment about it. So like if they say, oh, I don't really understand why they picked this color, and be like, oh, I can, tell you all about it. So I was thinking, this color would complement this color or something like that. And usually if you kind of acknowledge the fact that you have already heard their comment, they kind of realize the stuff that they've said. Usually they don't mean to be rude, and so it'll kind of just diffuse from there, and doesn't get any like worse than that. All in all, just be polite. If they are being like actually rude and kind of like making degrading comments or like really unnecessary comments and things like that, don't be afraid to say that just because you're selling and they're the customer. Like, it's not like you don't have any right to stand up to them. If you're not comfortable with it, also don't be afraid to maybe get staff. If you're friends with your neighbors, maybe like see if they can help you a little bit with it. So just be respectful, even if they do start saying rude things. As long as you are kind of polite, uh, I think that you are kind of above that. So things may happen sometimes, pretty rarely. I think most people who are rude don't mean to be, but it is something to keep in mind. And my rule is just to be respectful and polite. So, the second type of difficult attendees I wanted to cover is unwanted barnacles. So, this is a term that might not be very common outside of Artist Alley, but they are basically people who aren't really able to take a hint at when they have been at a booth for too long. And so these are people who might be a little bit socially unaware, and they don't really they're kind of unable to gauge if the other person is uncomfortable or something. So if that happens, again, most of the time they don't mean it at all. They're just excited to meet you. They're excited to talk to you. And so if that happens, if you are kind of getting a little bit uncomfortable, maybe it's getting a little awkward, just let them know if you're busy. So if for me, I put a lot of charms together behind the table. So I would just usually be like, hey, it was really great talking to you, but I got to put together some more charms. I kind of make them as I go. So if you want to come back later, that's fine, but I'm probably going to make these charms. Or something like that. Or if there are other customers, definitely be like, hey, it was great talking to you. I just need to talk to, these other attendees. Thanks for stopping by, and stuff like that. So again, barnacles generally don't mean to be barnacles. Just let them know if you are a little bit busy. If you are just uncomfortable and are shy and you don't really want to tell them to go away, just act busy. That's what I sometimes do. So again, just be respectful and polite. The last category of difficult attendees is hagglers. Most people, in my experience, when they are haggling, they're not necessarily haggling, they're just kind of asking if it's possible. So if you have like one washi tape for $8, they'd be like, oh, that's $8. Is it okay if I get like two for 15? And if you say no, they probably won't push it any past that. They're most likely just curious. If they are pushy, if they're like, well, it's just $1, or like, why don't you give me a discount or something like that? Don't be afraid to just tell them, how much effort that you've put into your items, how much time you've put into it, and just be like, I'm sorry that you feel that, you should get this discount. But unfortunately, the amount of work and money that I put into printing this item, I can't actually push it any lower than this number or something like that. And if they persist, just like with rude attendees, don't be afraid to go get staff, maybe get help from neighbors and stuff like that. So artist alleys and conventions really in general do strive to try to make a, good, happy, safe place for everybody. So if you are in an uncomfortable situation, again, don't hesitate to ask for help. Okay. Moving on, talking a little bit more about interacting and talking to attendees, is that there are a couple of cool interactive activities that you can do with convention attendees at your table. So these are just some of the stuff that I've personally seen. If you come up with a cool idea and you think it would really be a good fit for the type of items that you are selling, go for it. Just because somebody hasn't done it before doesn't mean you can't do it. So these are just some of the stuff that I've personally seen. So some people might give freebies or discounts at their table. So a common one I used to see quite a bit is that if you are cosplaying a specific character or like a specific skin of a character, then they get a discount on the print of that item or something like that. So maybe this person, in this case, is cosplayed as Diva from Overwatch, and if you have a Diva print, you could be like, oh, I'm if you're cosplaying this character, this print is 50% off or something like that. And that's just kind of a fun way to interact a little bit more directly with customers and cosplayers and stuff like that, especially if cosplayers are cosplaying. Or, I mean, of course they're cosplaying, but when they're the characters they're cosplaying, they're usually really passionate about. They've, spent a lot of time on it, or maybe they spent a lot of money on it. And so it's a good way to kind of cater to their passion. Something that I personally do a lot is actually a free print for either food or coffee. So in the morning, I might put up a sign that says, free 11 by 17 print if you get me a mocha or something like that. And then people might be like, oh, hey, I want to do that. And they'll go buy you a mocha. And I personally do it because for me, I usually convention by myself. I sell at the table by myself, and so it's a little bit harder for me to leave the table. So if I can have somebody else kind of bring that to me, for me, like it's kind of a win-win situation. So that's generally what I do. And then let's go to the next type of interactive activities that I have here, which is tip jars and shrines. And tip jars and shrines are something I feel like is really exclusive to anime cons. Um, and it usually what happens is like people will bring like little framed pictures, like sparkly frames or whatever, of their husbandos or their waifus, and they'll put it like on their table and they'll kind of like decorate it like a little shrine or something like that. And it's a really good conversation starter. So like people, attendees who are really passionate about your artwork, or sorry, about that character, they might drop by and like be like, oh my god, I love that character too, and then might kind of go from there. And I've seen a lot of people kind of mix that with tip jars. So tip jars can be kind of by its own also, just be like, oh, if you love my art, but, don't really want to buy anything, feel free to drop like quarters in here or something. But some people will also be like, tip jar to buy, your husbando a new frame or something like that. You can get really creative with it. Sometimes I've seen ones that are like, which one is the best boy? And it'll have like Kenny Crow on one and like Noctis on the other one. And then people kind of vote by putting things in the tip jar. So these are just kind of fun ways to do it. I will mention that paid raffles are usually not allowed because it is considered gambling, and most states just don't allow gambling. So if you have raffles of any kind where they have to buy something to get the raffle or just pay to get the raffle ticket itself, those are usually not allowed. So just watch out for that. So, Lucid Sky Art, welcome. May. So, hi, Donna. There's no such thing as a free drink. Okay, that's kind of true. I mean, technically, you're giving your artwork as for like a trade as for the drink. But I think it's a lot of fun and it's a good conversation starter. And Takoyaki says Kenny Crow number one. Yes, Kenny Crow number one. We deserve episode Kenny. I'm still waiting. Okay, moving on to the next topic. Here, keeping inventory. So far everything I've talked about is interacting with the customers. But of course, if you are selling items, it's generally a good idea to track in one way or another how much stuff you're selling. And there's three main ways I've seen do this. Again, do whatever works for you, but these are just kind of the three main types that I've seen. The first one is to write every single transaction down. So this means that you might have a notebook, and you just kind of sit there and be like, oh, I just made a transaction, 2 keychains for $20 or something like that. Some of the advantages of this is that it's the most comprehensive. So you are writing down every single transaction. So you have a lot of information, like which keychains are often bought together. If people get special discounts, maybe they're your friend or something like that, which you don't have to, obviously, but some people might give them like discounts or something like that, and you could kind of write that down. The disadvantage to writing everything is that it takes up a lot of time. So every single time after your transaction, you have to go back to your notebook and write it down. And if you have kind of a line, or if it's busy and there's a lot of traffic, sometimes you forget, you just don't remember you don't have time to write it all down. And so generally writing things down is good if it is a slow traffic convention. Maybe it's a really small convention. And there's just slow sales or something like that, that's generally a good time to do it. But if it starts to get a little busy, this might not be a good idea. The second type of method to keeping inventory is tallying. So what people will do is they'll make a spreadsheet kind of before the convention with, the title of their item, how much it is, how much it would be if it's like a deal, like if it's like buy 2 get 1 free or something, and then any comments. And every time you sell that item, you kind of tally in the corresponding boxes what you just sold and like how much it was or something like that. The advantage is that it is really quite fast at the convention, and because everything is already kind of in a spreadsheet format, it's pretty easy to analyze after you've gotten home. And you kind of want to look at like, oh, I wonder how much of this, Fire Emblem print I sold or something like that. You can just go to the spreadsheet and be like, oh, I sold 5 at full price and then 4 with a deal or something like that. The disadvantage to tallying is that it might be really easy to make a mistake, especially if it's kind of busy and you're feeling a little bit pressured. Because it's kind of a grid system, it's pretty easy to make a mistake, in my opinion. If you are like amazing at Excel sheets and stuff, maybe that's great for you. But personally for me, I found that it was really easy to make mistakes. Sometimes I'll like tally in the wrong boxes, pretty often actually. So these are some of the disadvantages. The last type of keeping inventory is doing an inventory count. So by that I mean before the convention, you count out whatever you have. So you can be like, okay, I have 10 of this specific print, I have 10 of this design of keychain, I have like 5 notebooks or something like that. And you just write that down somewhere, keep track of it, and then after the convention, you go home, and when you are going through all your stuff, you can be like, oh, I have 4 remaining, meaning I sold 6 of this design, or something like that. This is actually the one that I usually do, and some of the advantages of just having an inventory count before and after is that it doesn't take any time during the convention. So you don't have to worry about trying to keep track of anything. You just kind of sell and interact with customers, and you just don't worry about it until you get home. Sorry, that's my boyfriend laughing. The disadvantage of doing something like this is that it doesn't keep track of your exact transactions. So it doesn't keep track of, how many prints you sold, like at full price versus how many prints you sold at 2 for 20 or for like buy 2 get 1 free. And it also doesn't really keep track of any kind of like discounts that you've given like specifically to people. All you have is the total amount of stuff that you sold and the total amount of money that you made. So if you are someone who just really wants kind of these specific numbers about really specific things, maybe inventory counts aren't really good for you. So again, these are just kind of the methods that I've seen. You should just do whatever you think is easiest for you. I personally, again, do the inventory count, but I have friends who tally all the time. So just do whatever is good for you. And hello, James. Welcome to my stream. Okay, so next page that I wanted to talk about is to keep to take care of yourself while you're at the convention. So when you're at a convention, you are constantly talking to people. You are constantly moving your hands and kind of like doing mental work on like, oh, how much is this, how much is that, what is selling, sort of things like that. You're constantly doing something. And so conventions, even though it might seem like, oh, you're just kind of going there and talking to other attendees about all the stuff that you love, it's actually really, really tiring. And it's really common for people to get sick just because, one, there's a lot of people in an enclosed space. And two, you're just so tired that your body's immune system is kind of like getting lowered in strength. That was weird grammar, but you guys understand what I mean. So I personally, if I really tire myself at a convention, after I get home the week after, I'm like dead, and sometimes I get really sick. So these are just some things to keep in mind. And I have a couple tips here for you to make sure you're kind of tip-top in the best shape you can be at the convention. And the most important one I want to point out is to stay hydrated. So water is really important. Everybody needs water. Please drink water. I know I've heard some people say that they don't really want to drink water because they don't want to have to leave their table to go pee, which is a valid concern, especially if you're tabling by yourself. But water is really important, and you should probably still drink water. So, another tip that I want to point out is to bring food and snacks whenever possible. So, again, this kind of goes back to the water thing. If you can't really leave your table, you can't really go out and get food. So you don't want to just sit there at your table starving. When you're hungry, people get sad, people get angry and stuff. So bring food, ideally whenever possible. Some conventions don't allow outside food, but that's pretty uncommon. So I usually bring snacks, things that I don't need my hands to eat. And that's really important for the next point, which is to bring hand sanitizer. Conventions are pretty gross. Not in a sense that like the people there are gross or anything like that. It's just that there's so many people in such a confined space that there could be, any kind of flu, any kind of like plague going around. We actually call it the cod plague. Plague. Yes, plague. And the other thing is that if you are selling, you're constantly working with money. And we all know money is really, really gross. And so if you are eating or doing stuff, touching your face, whatever, and your hands are really gross, you can break out, you can get sick. So bring sanitizer. It's really good. And if you have a trash bag, that's a bonus because it really helps kind of organize and clean out your space. And yes, Jugatsu Hoshi, hello, welcome by the way. Also recommends like wet wipes. So anything like they have like baby wipes and stuff that I personally use too. So if you have antibacterial wipes and stuff like that, it's a really good idea. Get your hands as clean as possible without having to go to the bathroom. And okay, so on to the next point or the next tip. It's a good idea in general to wear layers, or if you are wearing kind of light clothing and you don't really want to wear layers because it's a cosplay or something, then bring blankets. So it's kind of hard to tell if a convention's going to be really hot or really cold. And so if you have layers, it's just really easy for you to, like bundle up or, take everything off. Not everything, but, enough clothes off so that you're comfortable. Because you don't want to get stuck in a convention hall that's like 60, 50 degrees Fahrenheit, and you don't have anything to wear on top of your t-shirt or something like that. So, and if you are too cold for too long, you actually might get sick. Like James, Jimbo Bags is in the comments here. Last year we went to a convention in Texas, and it was like June, so it was really hot out. But then the convention center itself was so cold that I think James got sick at that convention. I could be wrong, but it's don't be stuck in a cold hall without anything. And James also says shoes are important too. I tried barefoot once and it didn't work out. Yeah, don't. If you are worried about being cold at all, ideally you should wear, closed-toed shoes and everything. It's also generally a good idea I didn't mention it during setup, but if you are setting up, so on day 0 or day 1 and on the last day, it's generally a good idea to wear shoes that are easy to move around in. So like no stiletto heels, like maybe, pull back on your platform shoes and boots and stuff like that, just because you'll probably have to like run around your table and put stuff up and take stuff down. It's just generally a good idea to wear, comfortable shoes so that you don't have an accident and fall over or something like that. Yes. So Lucid Sky Art says, drink water, wear shoes. Yes, very important. And the last comment that I want to point out is that in general, if you are at a convention, it's probably a good idea to go to bed instead of stay up all night to party. You are absolutely welcome to do whatever you want, and if your recharge method is by partying, by all means go for it. But if you are like me and you get tired after staying up all night, there's nothing worse than waking up at 9 o'clock and having to sit at a table and sell when you're like hungover and really lacking sleep. So, and that's also like a disaster formula to get sick. So, again, just make sure you listen to your body and be healthy. So, yes, James also says, I don't drink water because weak bladder. That's really unfortunate. I'm sorry, James. Okay. Moving on to the next slide. After hours. So usually, you sell at a convention, it's all going great at like 8 p.m. or whatever when the artist alley closes. Usually what happens is the staff members will start to kind of push out the con goers, the con attendees, because there's always a little stragglers. If you guys have ever worked retail jobs, you kind of know there's sometimes people who come in like 5 minutes before close and they stay like 10 minutes over. There's also people like that in the artist alley, so generally expect stragglers up to 15 minutes after the artist alley has closed. If they're there like after 15 minutes, either the staff needs to do a little bit better at kind of pushing everybody out, or you're just free to say like, hey, the artist alley is closed. Is it okay if you come back tomorrow? I'll be here all weekend or something like that. So yeah, just keep in mind that even if it says like the artist alley closes at 8 p.m. exactly, there's always going to be a couple stragglers behind. Usually what people do when the artist alley does close is that people will put up like that extra tablecloth I kind of mentioned in the last part, or blankets in my case, because I always forget my tablecloth, and kind of throw it over their table so that it's kind of covered. So this is a picture that I took of the artist alley in Teco in Pittsburgh. After hours, and so you can kind of tell most of the places just have all of their stuff covered. If you have small items like charms, pouches, things like that that are pretty easy to grab, it might be a good idea to kind of take them off the table, maybe put it behind the table just so that it's not so easy for someone to like sneak up and grab. Uh, Most likely that's not going to happen, just because usually if the artist alley is closed, the hall is locked, and there's security around at any normal time, and so it's generally okay if you have prints up and things like that. But smaller items, just to be safe, I usually take it behind the table. Hello, real fake poop. Welcome to the stream. I don't know what I'm going to teach you, but welcome. um, the other thing a lot of people like to do is after hours, after the artist alley has closed, is that they will put up a sign. So it might say, hello, we are closed, but come back tomorrow at like 9 p.m. or 9 a.m. or something like that. And that's just like a little cute little sign that says you're closed and stuff like that. If you do have a locked hall, again, like I said, you can leave all your merchandise. Just maybe if you have them in the front, just kind of put them behind the table, maybe cover it up with a blanket. Always take your valuables with you though. Even if it's like locked, you just in case something happens, you don't want, your valuables like your money, your cell phone, your laptop, whatever, all of those stuff, just take it with you. If the artist alley is either not locked or if it's a 24-hour convention, then um, I've actually never done a convention like that, but if you're uncomfortable with leaving all of your stuff behind the table, kind of covered up, you can definitely take it with you. I think for prints, a lot of people actually just leave it kind of underneath the table, because even if it is like a 24-hour con, if somebody is going underneath the table that is covered, it looks kind of sketchy. So most people, I think, don't do that. That being said, if you really want to make sure your stuff doesn't get taken or anything like that, just take them with you. It doesn't hurt, except just maybe you just have to drag the suitcases back to the convention. But the display, most people, I have heard, just kind of leave them up. I've heard one case in the past where people have vandalized display prints, but it's only ever happened once. And I can't remember exactly which convention it was. It happened to be like a pretty small con where there wasn't any security or anything around either. If it's a like a medium to large size con, there's always going to be security around. So, okay. The other thing about after hours is that artists are, of course, because they're selling, those tables are theirs. They are allowed in the artist alley hall after closing for, a realistic amount of time. If usually the staff can't leave until the artists leave, and so if you want to stay back for like 3 hours, that's not really fair to the staff. So I would recommend you leave within like an hour of the artist alley closing. But it's a good idea to kind of walk around the halls, look at what other people have. If they're already gone, it might be a good idea just to note them so that you can drop by and say hi later or something like that. So it's good times, a lot of fun. The other thing that's a little bit related to that, to checking out other artists and stuff, is art trades. So art trades, for those of you who don't really know, are when you trade artworks or merchandise with other people. And it is a really fun thing that you can do at a convention. I do it a lot with my friends, and I could be like, oh, well, I'll trade you, this pin of this character that I know you like for that charm that I like, or something like that. It's just a really good way to kind of share your art, share your passion with other people who, also make art and stuff like that. So a couple of rules for art trades. It's always a good idea to definitely introduce yourself and your art first before asking for a trade, because sometimes I'll get someone who'll be like, hey, do you want to trade? And I have no idea who they are. I don't know what their art looks like. I just don't know who they are. And so it's always generally a good idea to kind of be like, hey, I am this. I was wondering if you do any art trades. My table is out that way, and just come free or feel free to come check it out anytime, or something like that. Another good rule is to trade the same prices or same type of items as the items that you're kind of asking for. So if if the other person wants a charm, maybe they should probably offer a charm, or maybe just kind of keep the total amount of like pricing of the merchandise equal. So you can be like, okay, let's trade like $20. And that way it's generally, there's no like hard feelings. You don't feel like people don't feel like they were gypped out of anything. And so don't be afraid to kind of say that and be like, oh, if somebody comes and be like, oh, I was wondering if you wanted to trade, and you can be like, oh yeah, sure, but I'm actually only doing print trades. That's something that I actually say. I a lot of times be like, oh, I'm actually just doing print trades if that's okay, and then I would just trade prints and stuff like that. And also make it clear that it's okay if they don't want to trade. That kind of goes both ways. You shouldn't force someone to trade with you if they don't want to. You do want to respect what they want. And also if you are asking for a trade, just make sure it's like, oh yeah, it's totally okay if you don't want to. I was just asking if you were interested or something like that. And yes, Ming raises a hand. How would you respectfully decline an art trade? So that's a really good question. It kind of depends on what you are declining. So this kind of follows up with this last point that I have here, which is that people have different reasons to not want to do a trade, like for whatever reason. And so don't take it personally if they say, oh, I'm sorry, I'm not doing trades or anything like that. Just be respectful. And frankly, I personally think that they don't necessarily have to give you a reason. If you're declining something, or if you're declining a trade, I also think that you don't necessarily have to provide a reason either. Just be like, oh, I'm sorry, I'm actually just not doing trades at all. I hope that's okay, or something like that. But me personally, what I do is if I don't really want to do a trade and I am asked for a trade, I usually say that I can't do a trade because I'm running low on inventory. And that's actually a lot of times true. For me, if I have like charms, I've had people be like, oh, would you be, willing to trade? And like, I love this charm. And I would be like, oh, I'm sorry, I'm actually running really low on my inventory. I'm kind of saving up for a convention that I have like afterwards. And so that's the way I personally do it because it's usually true. But again, I feel my personal opinion is that people don't necessarily have to give a reason to not art trade. And I just think it's a good idea for everybody to be respectful and kind of understand that there's a lot of different reasons why people might not want to trade. So, okay. James says say no in a different language. Works all the time. I don't know, but then how would they know that you're saying no, James? Jugatsushi says, personal tip, I don't always want stuff for myself from an artist who wants to trade, but I'll try trading for friends if I see something I think they'd like. Yeah, see, that's the thing too. Sometimes I'll be like, oh, I'm really sorry, but I'm actually just trading with friends too. And frankly, if the other artist kind of takes that personally, then it's not really your fault, because I feel like you shouldn't have to give a really personal reason that you don't want to do a trade for whatever reason. They'd walk away awkwardly usually. If not, then you walk away awkwardly. I usually just try to strike up conversations to try to make it not quite as awkward. So, again, interacting with people is always kind of a gray line, so just be respectful. Okay, moving on to the next one, the next slide. The last thing I want to talk about selling at the actual convention is teardown. So the teardown is essentially the backwards version of setup. Oh. Usually, the backwards version of of setting up. And so I personally usually take signs down first, and then some of the merchandise, then all the prints and stuff like that. Of course, you are free to do whatever you like in whatever like order you want. But a couple of the things that I do want to mention about teardown is that usually you're given 2 to 3 hours. Sometimes there's a hard deadline in when you have to leave, just because maybe the convention team has only booked it until 5 p.m. on Sunday. That means everybody related to the convention has to be out by 5 p.m. And so you do have to finish tearing down everything and leave before that time. If you need to catch a flight or you just think you need more time to tear it down, that's definitely okay. If it's like really early, you might just want to tell that to the staff just so that they're aware that, you know, you're not just tearing down because you just don't want to be there or anything like that. But it is definitely okay to pack up a little early. I would suggest that if you are packing up early, to put up a sign that says like, we're leaving 2 p.m. on Sunday or something like that. And then there might be people who will remember that and be like, oh, we should go back to the artist alley and check out that table because I think they're leaving early. Something like that. Another tip that I personally have is that if you are tearing down and you have more conventions after the one that you are currently at, it's a good idea to tear down kind of carefully. So if you have display prints, don't just like rumple them, because if you take down the display prints carefully, you can reuse them for the next convention as, you know, display prints. Or if you put it properly in like proper order, then maybe the next convention that you're going to, you don't even have to unpack anything. You just kind of take that suitcase you've just perfectly packed and then go again to the next convention. So I personally recommend to tear down kind of carefully, but again, it's up to you. The other thing I would like to mention is to pick up after yourself. So tear down usually results in a lot of trash everywhere. There's like tape that's being like taken off of display prints, and like zip ties that are being cut and all of that stuff. Just don't leave like a complete mess for everybody. It's generally more polite to kind of clean up after yourself. Don't like sit there and scrub the table and vacuum or anything like that, but just pick up whatever you can kind of grab easily. So that's generally a good idea. Okay, so that actually ends my comments for actually being at the convention. The next slide I have is a couple of graphs, couple of plots that I have pulled from Kiriska's Artist Alley surveys. They are, I believe, like $5 on Gumroad. There's a lot of really good information for like anonymous if you are kind of looking into the numbers of actual conventions. So I just wanted to kind of pull out, for those of you who are like just starting out and have no idea what they're expecting, some of the kind of numbers and trends that we generally see. So the graph on the left here is gross revenue percentile by experience. So this is basically like, this down here means that 10% of the people make, you know, what is this, like $500 or less. And the 50th percentile in this graph refers to somewhere between like $800 to $1,500. So that's basically saying that 50% of, you know, all of the conventions in across all sorts of people, they make somewhere around this range. And then all the way up here we have like the 99th percentile who, you know, at the very, very top here have like $13,000. Down here closer to like 7,500 or something like that. So again, these numbers are including all types of conventions, and frankly, there are many more smaller conventions compared to larger conventions. And so it's generally a good idea if you are looking at a bigger convention that you would expect numbers a little bit bigger than the medians here. But these are just kind of numbers to get you started on things to expect. So like I said, based on this graph, it's probably not realistic to expect something like $10,000 at your first con. So just use it as like really, really vague guidelines like that. So this graph on the right here is average gross revenue by attendance. So this is basically just split into the size of the convention and how much average amount of money people made. So at the lower end, for conventions less than 1,000, in this case I believe it was the arithmetic mean that was calculated here at like $300. At the top, it's about 25,000 attendees with an average about $2,000. So these are just some numbers that were submitted to the survey. Again, I don't know like exactly the type, the entire range of the people who applied. And if you are interested in that kind of number, again, Kiriska, this is her name right here, has all of that info. She is coming out with her 2017 one, I think sometime this month. So again, keep a lookout for that if that's something you're interested. So I don't want to like scare anybody or like encourage people to do it just for the money or anything like that. Just remember that if you are, going to conventions and you don't make a lot of money your first time, just don't fret it. It's your first time. I think my first convention ever, I made a revenue. I made of about, I think, $500. Maybe not even. Maybe like $400. My first convention. And I was lucky because it was my local college convention, and so I didn't have a lot of costs. But I think that's about as much money I made my first convention. So yeah, that's just my personal experience. Everybody's different. There's also no like exact formula of how you did good at a convention. That's all relative. So just make your own rules and just kind of do what you're personally comfortable with. Okay, yeah, so Lucid Sky Art says, me too, I had similar numbers for my first con. Yeah, so like a couple $100, is probably pretty average for your first con. So I think the first couple times I did it, I was like, as long as I don't lose any money, I am good. So, and that's a perfectly fine metric if that's just what you want to do. Okay, so that's it. Here I just have a bullet list of all the other types of resources that are available on the internet. Yeah, these all have a lot of information. These Tumblr series and the blog series, these are all like really good if you like to read. The Artist Alley Network International group is a little bit hard to navigate just because the group is super big. But it's up there. It does have a pretty good amount of information if you're just starting out. So, oh, and then Juga Toshi also says same. So, again, couple $100 probably pretty normal for your first convention. Okay, that's it for my Artist Alley 101s. I can't believe I actually finished everything. I'll take questions. Oh, Takoyaki says ANI also has a Discord. I didn't know that. I actually personally don't really use a Discord. I just signed up for a Discord today. So it's all Juga Toshi's fault. But yeah, thanks guys. Thanks for sticking with me, especially for those of you who like honestly I don't know. You guys know much more than me and I don't know what you guys are doing here. But yeah, you're welcome, guys. Let me know if you guys have any questions. Real Fake Poop, are you planning to sell at conventions? Are you going to join the dark side? I'm just kidding. We're all really nice, for the most part. Yeah. No, no, you don't. Juga, You don't suck. And are we nice? Oh my god, two separate people said, are we actually nice? I think we're pretty nice, guys. We just like our own stuff. We're pretty nice. Come join us. But yeah, I can answer like any other question too. Maybe I should kind of go back to the first slide. These are all, look at all of these slides. I have 71 slides and it took me 4 separate sessions to go through it. Oh my god, only I am nice? That's not true. There's a lot of really nice people. I don't know. Golden rule. Be polite, everyone. I know, I have so many slides. So much. Thank you! I'm really, Cece, I'm glad you think my slides are informative. I tried to make them as informative as possible.